Mahārāja Śrīla Gurudev ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Ashtatarashatashmad Śrīla Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Goswami Mahārāja ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Ashtatarashatashmad Śrīla Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Mahārāja ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Ashtatarashatashmad Śrīla Bhakti Vedanta Swami Mahārāja Śrīla Prabhupada ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Ashtatarashatashmad Śrīla Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Goswami Mahārāja ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vishwapar Ashtatarashatashmad Śrīla Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Mahā-Bhagavat Śrīla Gopshadas Babaji Maharaj ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Śrīla Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki jai, Nityal Pravishtam Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Śrīla Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki jai, Shri Rupa Gauriya Guru Varga ki jai, Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath Sharda Goswami Prabhu ki jai, Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parashad Vrinda ki jai, Namacharya Śrīla Haridas Thakur ki jai, Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Kshetra Mandal Gaura Mandal Vraja Mandal Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki jai, Sarva Avishtabhrata Giriraj Maharaj ki jai, Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund ki jai, Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi ki jai, Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki jai, Shri Bhakti Devi ki jai, Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya ki jai, Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Dandavat Pranams Prajumna Prabhu, Raseshwari Mataji, Gargaraj, and whoever's watching from Gaudiya Kirtan live group. It doesn't let me know the names of people watching from there for some weird reason. Alright, so okay, so we read about Pṛthu's rule, the reception of the Kumaras, and Pṛthu Mahārāja's inquiries from them. And then Sanat Kumar, he answers Pṛthu Mahārāja's question, which is by what means will there be benefit for the suffering people? And so Sanat Kumar immediately answers that, saying, attachments to the Lord and detachment from the bodily concept. And then he explains the means for developing it. We've already gone over that a few times, so I'm not going to go over that again. And then he explains the subtle body, its presence, its absence, and its destruction. And attachment to sense gratification is the cause of samsara. Moksha is the most important amongst the four goals of human life, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Then he explains Bhakti Mishra Gyan. Devotees overcome samsara, but non-devotees cannot. Okay, so actually let's read from this point, from Bhakti Mishra Gyan all the way to where we are now. So that's 37. That's what we read yesterday. Attachment to sense gratification is the cause of samsara. Thinking of sense gratification causes the mind to be agitated, which causes the discriminating power of intelligence to become lost, which makes one lose one's memory, and then knowledge is destroyed. Sense gratification leads to lower forms of life. Constantly thinking of money and its use for sense gratification destroys all of one's goals, which causes loss of knowledge and experienced knowledge, like realized knowledge, and which causes entrance into immovable life forms. Be detached from things that obstruct the four goals of human life. Or just the goals of human life, because the fifth goal of human life is prema. It's even beyond moksha. So those who desire to cross the ocean of nescience should never have attachment for things which completely obstruct dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Moksha is the most important of the 4 Purusharthas and must be taken very seriously. The 3 other are all subject to death and destruction. Whatever. They are subject to destruction by death. How are the other 3 goals subject to destruction? The Lord destroys all temporary goals. There is nothing auspicious for those whose goals will be destroyed by the Lord as time. Such temporary goals, higher or lower, exist only in relation to the material modes. Bhakti Mishra Gyan, with the predominance of Gyan and the goal of Sayuja Mukti. Understand the Supersoul, who is living within the hearts of all moving and non-moving beings, covered by bodies, senses, life airs, intelligence, and false ego. One should meditate, I am He, so Smī. Note: the impersonalist conception of mantras like Tat Tvam Asi and Soham is that the Supreme Lord and the Jiva are one. But from the devotee's perspective, these mantras assert that both the Supreme Lord and the Jiva are of the same quality. So now we're reading Surrender to the Supersoul, who is one. Let's just read this because I want to see what the link is. Surrender to the Supersoul, one who is with cause and effect. Surrender to the Supersoul. Surrender to the Supersoul, who is one with cause and effect, is ever liberated, Nityamukta, completely pure, Parishuddha, and the highest truth, Vishuddha Tattva. One who has transcended Maya by deliberate consideration, which clears the misconception of a snake for a rope, can understand him. Link. Understanding Pṛthu's distaste for the words so Smī in verse 37, Sanat Kumar now speaks about pure bhakti. So far he spoke about the path of bhakti mixed with Gyan. Now he will explain pure bhakti, which is the best path. Okay. Oh wait, we're on 48. Oh my god. Sorry guys. I had a weird morning this one. So we already read this. Okay. Sorry guys, okay. So give up karmashayam by serving Lord Vasudeva. By engaging in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord, devotees very easily uproot the hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities. But non-devotees, jnanis and yogis, even if they strongly try, cannot stop the waves of sense gratification. Therefore, worship Vasudeva. Note, one can give up inferior desires when engaged in superior desires. When the tide from the ocean overfloods a river, the waves of the ocean take prominence over those of the river. Similarly, a devotee plans so many things for the Lord's service that his stagnant material desires become overflooded by the desire to serve the Lord. Cross Sangsara, which is the boat of the Lord's feet. The ocean of nescience is very difficult for non-devotees to cross, because it is infested with many dangerous sharks. Therefore, by making the Lord's worshipable lotus feet as a boat, cross this difficult ocean of samsara. Then Pṛthu Mahārāja praises the Kumaras. After being thus enlightened by Sanat Kumar, who is well versed in spiritual knowledge, Atma Medasa, the king praised the Kumaras as follows. You confirmed Lord Vishnu's blessings. Formerly, he showered me with his causeless mercy by indicating that you would come to my house. What can I offer? You have carried out the Lord's order, because you are as compassionate as he. Since all that I possess is sadhu uchishtam, is the remnants of the sadhus, how can I give anything as Guru Dakshina? Note, Pṛthu gave all his wealth in charity at the end of his horse sacrifice. What remained he considered the remnants of the devotees. Even before that, he considered his kingdom to have been given to him by the saintly persons headed by Bhrigu, who turned his body from King Bane. Thus he only possessed remnants. I have offered everything, my life, wife, children, home, furniture, kingdom, strength, land, and treasury to saintly persons. Who can be a leader? Only one who knows the principles of Vedic knowledge deserves to be the commander-in-chief, leader of state, punisher, and ruler of all planets. Note, by saying verses 44 and 45, Pṛthu indirectly offered everything to the Kumaras. 46. Brahman's mercy. It is the Brahmins who enjoy, wear, and give what is their own property. By their mercy, the Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras eat their food. Non-repayable debt. The path of self-realization is explained by the knowers of the Vedas for our enlightenment, with complete conviction and Vedic evidence. Such merciful personalities can be satisfied only by their own activities of uplifting the fallen souls. Who can repay them? One can only offer water with folded hands. One who tries to repay them is a joker. Okay, now the Kumaras depart. Okay, this is where we are. 1 second, I just want to get some. Maitreya uvacha tamatma yoga pataya adirajena pujita shilam tadiyam shangsanta ke bhavan mishatam drinam. The great sage Maitreya continued, being thus worshipped by Maharaj Pṛthu, the 4 Kumaras who were masters of devotional service became very pleased. Indeed, they appeared in the sky and praised the character of the king, and everyone observed them. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It is said that the demigods never touch the surface of the earth. They walk and travel in space only. Let me check the connection's still going. Okay, it is. Good. Dandavat pranams Madhavi Didi and Pujamna Guru Haribo. So they walk and travel in space only. Like the great sage Narad, the Kumaras do not require any machine to travel in space. They are also residents of Siddhaloka, who can travel in space without machines. Since they can go from one planet to another, they are called Siddhas. That is to say, they have acquired all mystic and yogic powers. Such great saintly persons who have attained complete perfection in mystic yoga are not visible in this age on earth. They're not visible in this age on earth because humanity is not worthy for their presence. The Kumaras, however, praised the characteristics of Maharaj Pṛthu and his great devotional attitude and humility. The Kumaras were greatly satisfied by King Pṛthu's method of worship. It was by the grace of Maharaj Pṛthu that the common citizens in his domain could see the Kumaras flying in outer space. Vanyastu duro mahatam Sanstitya dhyatma shikshaya apta kamam ivatmanam mena atmanyavastita. Amongst great personalities, Maharaj Pṛthu was the chief by virtue of his fixed position in relation to spiritual enlightenment. He remains satisfied as one who has achieved all success in spiritual understanding. Purport. Remaining fixed in devotional service gives one the utmost in self-satisfaction. Actually, self-satisfaction can be achieved only by pure devotees, who have no desire other than to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead has nothing to desire, he is fully satisfied with himself. Similarly, a devotee who has no desire other than to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead is as self-satisfied as the Supreme Lord. Everyone is hankering after peace of mind and self-satisfaction, but these can only be achieved by becoming a pure devotee of the Lord.
King Pṛthu's statements in previous verses regarding his vast knowledge and perfect devotional service are justified here, for he is considered best amongst all Mahatmas. In Bhagavad Gita 9.13, Shri Krishna speaks of Mahatmas in this way. Mahatmanastumang partha daivam prakritamashritā bhajantyananyamanaso gyatva bhutadimavyayam. O son of Pṛtha, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. The Mahatmas are not under the clutches of the illusory energy, but are under the protection of the spiritual energy. Because of this, the real Mahatma is always engaged in the devotional service of the Lord. Pṛthu Mahārāja exhibited all the symptoms of a Mahatma. Therefore, he is mentioned in this verse as Dhuryo Mahatam, best of the Mahatmas. Karmani chayata kalam yata desham yata balam yato chittam yata vittam akarod brahmasatkritam. Being self-satisfied, Maharaj Pṛthu executed his duties as perfectly as possible according to the time and his situation, strength, and financial position. His only aim in all his activities was to satisfy the absolute truth. In this way, he duly acted. Purport. Maharaj Pṛthu was a responsible monarch, and he had to execute the duties of a kshatriya, a king and a devotee at the same time. Being perfect in the Lord's devotional service, he could execute his prescribed duties with complete perfection as befitted the time and circumstance, and his financial strength and personal ability. In this regard, the word karmani in this verse is significant. Pṛthu Mahārāja's activities were not ordinary, for they were in relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Srila Rupa Goswami has advised that things which are favorable to devotional service should not be rejected, nor should activity favorable for devotional service be considered ordinary work or fruit of activity. For example, an ordinary worker conducts business in order to earn money for his sense gratification. A devotee may perform the same work in exactly the same way, but his aim is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Consequently, his activities are not ordinary. Pṛthu Mahārāja's activities were therefore not ordinary, but were all spiritual and transcendental, for his aim was to satisfy the Lord. Just as Arjuna, who was a warrior, had to fight to satisfy Krishna, Pṛthu Mahārāja performed his royal duties as king for the satisfaction of Krishna. Indeed, whatever he did as emperor of the whole world was perfectly befitting a pure devotee. It is therefore said by a Vaishnava poet, Vaishnavera kriya mudre vigye na bujai. No one can understand the activities of a pure devotee. It even says vigye na bujai. Even those who are very learned are not able to understand. A pure devotee's activities may appear like ordinary activities, but behind them there is profound significance, the satisfaction of the Lord. In order to understand the activities of a Vaishnava, one has to become very expert. Maharaj Pṛthu did not allow himself to function outside the institution of 4 varnas and 4 ashrams, although as a Vaishnava he was Paramahamsa, transcendental to all material qualities. He remained at his position as a kshatriya to rule the world, and at the same time remains transcendental to such activities by satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Concealing himself as a pure devotee, he externally manifested himself as a very powerful and dutiful king. In other words, none of his activities were carried out for his own sense gratification. Everything he did was meant for the satisfaction of the senses of the Lord. This is clearly explained in the next verse. And I'm just checking every now and then to make sure the internet's still going, because today they're fixing the internet, the Wi-Fi people. They're fixing their power system. Phalam brahmani sanyasya nirvishanga samahita karma daksham chaman manvana atmanam prakrite param. Maharaj Pṛthu completely dedicated himself to be an eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, transcendental to material nature. Consequently, all the fruits of his activities were dedicated to the Lord, and he always thought of himself as a servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the proprietor of everything. Purport. The life and dedication of Maharaj Pṛthu in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead serve as a good example of Karma Yoga. The term Karma Yoga is often used in Bhagavad Gita, and herein Maharaj Pṛthu is giving a practical example of what Karma Yoga actually is. The first requirement for the proper execution of Karma Yoga is given herein. Phalam Brahmani Sannyasa or Vinyasa. One must give the fruits of his activities to the Supreme Brahman, Parabrahman Krishna. By doing so, one actually situates himself in the renounced order of life, sannyas. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 18.2, giving up the fruits of one's activities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead is called sannyas. Kamyanam karmanam nyasam sannyasam kavayo vidu sarva karma phalatyagam prahustyagam vichakshana. To give up the results of all activities is called renunciation, tyag, by the wise. And that state is called the renounced order of life, sannyas, by great learned men. Although he was living as a householder, Pṛthu Mahārāja was actually in the renounced order of life, sannyas. This will be clearer in the following verses. The word nirvishanga, uncontaminated, is very significant, because Pṛthu Mahārāja was not attached to the results of his activities. In this material world, a person is always thinking of the proprietorship of everything he accumulates or works for. When the fruits of one's activities are rendered to service of the Lord, one is actually practicing Karma Yoga. Anyone can practice Karma Yoga, but it is especially easy for the householder who can install the deity of the Lord in the home and worship him according to the methods of Bhakti Yoga. This method includes 9 items: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping the deity, praying, carrying out orders, serving Krishna as a friend, and sacrificing everything for him. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Padasevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyam, Sakyam Atma Nivedanam. These methods of Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga are being broadcast all over the world by the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Anyone can learn these methods simply by following the examples of the members of the society. In one's home or in a temple, the deity is considered the proprietor of everything, and everyone is considered the deity's eternal servant. The Lord is transcendental, for he is not part of this material creation. The words prakrite param are used in this verse because everything within this material world is created by the external material energy of the Lord. But the Lord himself is not a creation of this material energy. The Lord is the supreme superintendent of all material creations, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 9.10. Maya dakshina prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetunanena konteya jagad viparivartate. This material nature is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all the moving and non-moving beings. And by its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. All material changes and material progress taking place by the wonderful interaction of matter are under the superintendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Events in the material world are not taking place blindly. If one always remains a servant of Krishna and engages everything in his service, one is accepted as Jivan Mukta, a liberated soul, even during his lifetime within the material world. Generally, liberation takes place after one gives up this body. But one who lives according to the example of Pṛthu Mahārāja is liberated even in this lifetime. In Krishna consciousness, the results of one's activities depend on the will of the Supreme Person. Indeed, in all cases, the result is not dependent on one's own personal dexterity, but is completely dependent on the will of the Supreme. This is the real significance of phalam brahmani sannyasya. A soul dedicated to the service of the Lord should never think of himself as the personal proprietor or superintendent. A dedicated devotee should prosecute his work according to the rules and regulations described in devotional service. The results of his activities are completely dependent on the supreme will of the Lord. Griheshu vartamanopi sasamrajya shriyam vita nasajatendriyarteshu niraham atirak arkavat. Maharaj Pṛthu, who was very opulent due to the prosperity of his entire empire, remained at home as a householder. Since he was never inclined to utilize his opulence for the gratification of his senses, he remained unattached, exactly like the sun, which is unaffected in all circumstances. Purport. The word griheshu is significant in this verse. Out of the 4 ashrams, the brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas, only a grihastha, or householder, is allowed to associate with women. Therefore, the grihastha ashram is a kind of license for sense gratification given to the devotee. Sorry, my throat's, I need to clear it. Pṛthu Mahārāja was special in that although he was given license to remain a householder, and although he possessed immense opulences in his kingdom, he never engaged in sense gratification. This was a special sign that indicated him to be a pure devotee of the Lord. A pure devotee is never attracted by sense gratification, and consequently he is liberated. In material life, a person engages in sense gratification for his own personal satisfaction, but in the devotional or liberated life, one aims to satisfy the senses of the Lord. In this verse, Maharaj Pṛthu is likened to the sun, Arkavat. Sometimes the sun shines on stool, urine, and so many other polluted things. But since the sun is all-powerful, it is never affected by the polluted things with which it associates. It is never affected by the polluted things with which it associates. On the contrary, the sunshine sterilizes and purifies polluted and dirty places. Similarly, a devotee may engage in so many material activities, but because he has no desire for sense gratification, they never affect him. On the contrary, he dovetails all material activities for the service of the Lord. Since a pure devotee knows how to utilize everything for the Lord's service, he is never affected by material activities. Instead, by his transcendental plans, he purifies such activities. This is described in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatvena Nirmalam. His aim is to become completely purified in the service of the Lord without being affected by material designations. Evam adhyatma yogena karmanyanusmana samacharan putran utpadayam asa pancharchishyatma sammatan. Being situated in a liberated position of devotional service, Pṛthu Mahārāja not only performed all fruitive activities, but also begot 5 sons by his wife, Archi. Indeed, all his sons were begotten according to his own desire. Purport. As a householder, Pṛthu Mahārāja had 5 sons by his wife, Archi, and all these sons were begotten as he desired them. They were not born whimsically or by accident. How one can beget children according to one's own desire is practically unknown in the present age, Kali Yuga. In this regard, the secret of success depends on the parents' acceptance of the various purificatory methods known as samskars. The first samskar, the Garbhadan samskar, or child-begetting samskar, is compulsory, especially for the higher castes, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, sex life which is not against religious principles is Krishna himself, and according to religious principles, when one wants to beget a child, he must perform the Garbhadan samskar. before having sex. The mental state of the father and mother before sex will certainly affect the mentality of the child to be begotten. A child who is begotten out of lust may not turn out as the parents desire. As stated in the Shastras, yatha yonir yatha bijam. Yatha yoni indicates the mother, and yatha bijam indicates the father. If the mental state of the parents is prepared before they have sex, the child which they will beget will certainly reflect their mental condition. It is therefore understood by the words Atmasammatan that both Pṛthu Mahārāja and Archie underwent the Garbhadan purificatory process before begetting children, and thus they begot all of their sons according to their desires and purified mental states. Pṛthu Mahārāja did not beget his children out of lust, nor was he attracted to his wife for sense gratificatory purposes. He begot the children as a grihasta for the future administration of his government all over the world. Just one note here, though. Srila Prabhupada is mentioning this because it is, I think, well, I can't say why Srila Prabhupada is doing things, but I think this is to encourage people to actually go through the right process. But it doesn't fully guarantee that there's no way to fully guarantee that your child is going to be perfect and a pure devotee or whatever, just like a great devotee, or just like Advaita Acharya, who is, Mahavishnu himself. When three of his children were against, were like not favorable to Bhakti. And only three of his sons are accepted by Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And there's many cases so it's not just by, but everybody should go through and follow the Garbhadan Samskar also. And we see the opposite also. People who were born in really sinful circumstances, or who were born in a really low families or sinful families, they would become pure devotees. So, Anyways, Vijitashvam Dhumrakesham Haryaksham Dravinam Vrikam Sarvesham Lokapalanam Dadaraika Priturgunan. After begetting 5 sons named Vijitashva, Dhumrakesha, Haryaksha, Dravina, and Vrika, Pṛthu Mahārāja continued to rule the planet. He accepted all the qualities of the deities who governed all other planets. Purport. In each and every planet there is a predominating deity. It is understood from Bhagavad Gita that in the sun there is a predominating deity named Vivasvan. Similarly, there is a predominating deity of the moon and of the various planets. Actually, the predominating deities in all the other planets are descendants from the predominating deities of the sun and the moon. On this planet Earth, there are 2 Kshatriya dynasties, and one comes from the predominating deity of the sun, and the other from the predominating deity of the moon. These dynasties are known as Surya Vangsha and Chandra Vangsha, respectively. When the monarchy existed on this planet, the chief member was one of the members of the Surya dynasty, or Surya Vangsha, and the subordinate kings belonged to the Chandra Vangsha. However, Mahārāja Pṛthu was so powerful that he could exhibit all the qualities of the predominating deities in other planets. In the modern age, people from Earth have tried to go to the moon, but they have not been able to find anyone there. What to speak of meeting the moon's predominating deity? The Vedic literature, however, repeatedly informs us that the moon is full of highly elevated inhabitants who are counted amongst the demigods. We are therefore always in doubt about what kind of moon adventure the modern scientists of this planet, Earth, have undertaken. My idea with this also is that, our bodies on this planet are made up of water, and we have certain, like a certain bodily composition to perceive things in this world. And the moon planet, everybody's bodies are a lot more subtle, and there's a lot more, you know what I mean? And and their bodily composition, everything is completely different. And so we can't see things, certain things we're not able to see with our gross eyes. Like we can't see heavenly beings with our gross eyes and things like that. So even if even if we are in the moon, then we won't be able to see actually everything that's there. Gopitaya jagat shrishte kale sve sve chutatmaka manuvag vrittibhi somyar gunai samranjayan praja. Since Maharaj Pṛthu was a perfect devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he wanted to protect the Lord's creation by pleasing the various citizens according to their various desires. Therefore, Pṛthu Mahārāja used to please them in all respects by his words, he used to please them in all respects by his words, mentality, works, and gentle behavior. He used to deal with all of the citizens like that. Purport. As will be explained in the next verse, Pṛthu Mahārāja used to please all kinds of citizens by his extraordinary capacity to understand the mentality of others. Indeed, his dealings were so perfect that every one of the citizens was very much satisfied and lived in complete peace. The word Achyutatmaka is significant in this verse, for Maharaj Pṛthu used to rule this planet as the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He knew that he was the representative of the Lord, and that the Lord's creation must be protected intelligently. Atheists cannot understand the purpose behind the creation. Although this material world is condemned when it is compared to the spiritual world, there is still some purpose behind it. Modern scientists and philosophers cannot understand that purpose, nor do they believe in the existence of a creator. They try to establish everything by their so-called scientific research, but they do not center anything around the Supreme Creator. A devotee, however, can understand the purpose of creation, which is to give facilities to the living entities who want to lord it over material nature. The ruler of this planet should therefore know that all the inhabitants, especially human beings, have come to this material world for sense enjoyment. It is therefore the duty of the ruler to satisfy them in their sense enjoyment, as well as to elevate them to Krishna consciousness, so that they can all ultimately return home back to Godhead. With this idea in mind, the king or government head should rule the world. In this way, everyone will be satisfied. How can this be accomplished? There are many examples, like Pṛthu Mahārāja and the history of his regent. How do you say that? Regency? Okay, yeah. Regency, no, it's regency. And the history of his regency on this planet. These are many examples like Pṛthu Mahārāja, and the history of his regency on this planet is elaborately described in the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Even in this fallen age, if the rulers, governors, and presidents take advantage of Pṛthu Mahārāja's example, there will certainly be a reign of peace and prosperity throughout the world. Rajeta. Oh wait, let me just check everything's still running. Yes. Rajeta Namadeyan Somaraja Iva Para Suryavad Visrijan Grinan Pratapangscha Bhuvo Vasu. Maharaj Pṛthu became as celebrated as King Somaraj, the king of the moon. He was also powerful and exacting, just like the sun god, who distributes heat and light and at the same time exacts all the planetary waters. Purport. In this verse, Maharaj Pṛthu is compared to the kings of the moon and sun. The king of the moon and the king of the sun serve as examples of how the Lord desires the universe to be ruled. The sun distributes heat and light, and at the same time exacts water from all planets. The moon is very pleasing at night, and when one becomes fatigued after a day's labor in the sun, he can enjoy the moonshine. Like the sun god, Pṛthu Mahārāja distributed his heat and light to give protection to his kingdom, for without heat and light, no one can exist. Similarly, Pṛthu Mahārāja exacted taxes and gave such strong orders to the citizens and government that no one had the power to disobey him. On the other hand, he pleased everyone, just like the moonshine. Both the sun and the moon have particular influences by which they maintain order in the universe, and modern scientists and philosophers should become familiar with the Supreme Lord's perfect plan for universal maintenance. Durdarshas tejase vagnir mahendra iva durjaya titikshaya dharitriva dhyor iva bhishtado nrinam. Maharaj Pṛthu was so strong and powerful that no one could disobey his orders any more than one could conquer fire itself. He was so strong that he was compared to Indra, the king of heaven, whose power is inseparable. On the other hand, Maharaj Pṛthu was also as tolerant as the earth, and in fulfilling various desires of human society, he was like heaven itself. Nice examples. Purport. It is the duty of a king to give protection to the citizens and to fulfill their desires. At the same time, the citizens must obey the laws of the state. Maharaj Pṛthu maintained all the standards of good government, and he was so invincible that no one could disobey his orders any more than a person could stop heat and light emanating from a fire. He was so strong and powerful that he was compared to the king of heaven, Indra. In this age, modern scientists have been experimenting with nuclear weapons, and in a former age, they used to release Brahmastras. But all these Brahmastras and nuclear weapons are insignificant compared to the thunderbolt of the King of Heaven. When Indra releases a thunderbolt, even the biggest hills and mountains crack. On the other hand, Maharaj Pṛthu was as tolerant as the earth itself, and he fulfilled all the desires of his citizens, just like torrents of rain from the sky. Without rainfall, it is not possible to fulfill one's various desires on this planet. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 3.14, Parjanyad anasambhava. Food grains are produced only because rain falls from the sky, and without grains, no one on the earth can be satisfied. Consequently, an unlimited distribution of mercy is compared to the water falling from the clouds. Maharaj Pṛthu distributed his mercy incessantly, much like rainfall. In other words, Maharaj Pṛthu was softer than a rose and harder than a thunderbolt. In this way, he ruled over his kingdom. Varshati sma yatha kamam parjanya iva tarpayan samudra iva durbodha satvena chalarad iva. Just as rainfall satisfies everyone's desires, Maharaj Pṛthu used to satisfy everyone. He was like the sea in that no one could understand his depths, and he was like Meru, the king of hills, and the fixity of his purpose. What's fixity? Fixity? Oh, okay, yeah, of course, it's what you'd think it is. The state of being unchanging or permanent. Purport. Maharaj Pṛthu used to distribute his mercy to suffering humanity, and it was like rainfall after excessive heat. The ocean is wide and expansive, and it is very difficult to measure its length and breadth. Similarly, Pṛthu Mahārāja was so deep and grave that no one could fathom his purposes. The hill known as Meru is fixed in the universe as a universal pivot, and no one can move it an inch from its position. Similarly, no one could ever dissuade Maharaj Pṛthu when he was determined. Dharmaradiva shikshayam ashcharye himavaniva kuvera iva koshadyo guptarto varuno yata. Maharaj Pṛthu's intelligence and education were exactly like that of Yamaraj, the superintendent of death. His opulence was comparable to the Himalaya mountains, where all valuable jewels and metals are stocked. He possessed great riches like Kuvera, the treasurer of the heavenly planets, and no one could reveal his secrets, for they were like the demigod Varunas. Purport. Yamaraj, or Dharmaraj, as the superintendent of death, has to judge the criminal living entities who have committed sinful activities throughout their lives. Consequently, Yamaraj is expected to be most expert in judicial matters. Pṛthu Mahārāja was also highly learned and exceedingly exact in delivering his judgment upon the citizens. No one could excel him in opulence any more than estimate the stock of minerals and jewels in the Himalaya mountains. Therefore he is compared to Kuvera, the treasurer of the heavenly planets. Nor could anyone discover the secrets of his life any more than learn the secrets of Varuna, the demigod presiding over the water, the night, and the western sky. Varuna is omniscient, and since he punishes sins, he is prayed to for forgiveness. He is also the sender of disease and is often associated with Mitra and Indra. Interesting, I never knew that about Varuna. I always just knew him as the presiding demigod of... Yeah. Okay. Matarishveva sarvatma palena mahaso jasha avisha hyataya devo bhagavan bhutara diva. In his bodily strength and in the strength of his senses, Mahārāja Pṛthu was as strong as the wind, which can go anywhere and everywhere. As far as his intolerance was concerned, he was just like the all-powerful Rudra expansion of Lord Shiva, or Sadashiv. Kandarpa iva saundarye manasi mrigara diva vatsalye manuvandrenam prabhutve bhagavan aja. In his bodily beauty, he was just like Cupid, and in his thoughtfulness, he was like a lion. In his affection, he was like Swayambhuvamanu, and in his ability to control, he was like Lord Brahma. Brihaspatir Brahmavade Atmavatve Swayam Hari Bhaktya Go Guru Vipreshu Vishvaksenanuvartishu Riya Prashraya Shilabhyam Atmatulya Parodhyame. In his personal behavior, Pṛthu Mahārāja exhibited all good qualities, and in spiritual knowledge, he was exactly like Brihaspati. In self-control, he was like the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. As far as his devotional service was concerned, he was a great follower of the devotees, who were attached to cow protection and rendering of all service to the spiritual master and the Brahmins. He was perfect in his shyness and in his gentle behavior, and when he engaged in some philanthropic activity, he worked as if he were working for his own personal self. Purport. When Lord Chaitanya talked to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, the Lord honored him as the Incarnation of Brihaspati. Brihaspati is the chief priest of the heavenly kingdom, and he is a follower of the philosophy known as Brahmavad, or Mayavad. Brihaspati is also a great logician. It appears from this statement that Mahārāja Pṛthu, although a great devotee constantly engaged in the loving service of the Lord, could defeat all kinds of impersonalists and Mayavadis by his profound knowledge of the Vedic scriptures. We should learn from Mahārāja Pṛthu that a Vaishnav, or devotee, must not only be fixed in the service of the Lord, but if required, must be prepared to argue with the impersonalist Mayavadis with all logic and philosophy and defeat their contention that the absolute truth is impersonal. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ideal self-controller, or brahmachari. When Krishna was elected to be president of the Rajasuya Yajna performed by Maharaj Yudhishthira, Grandfather Bhishma Dev praised Lord Krishna as the greatest brahmachari. Because Grandfather Bhishma was a brahmachari, he was quite fit to distinguish a brahmachari from a vyabhichari. Although Pṛthu Mahārāja was a householder and father of 5 children, he was still considered to be most controlled. One who begets Krishna-conscious children for the benefits of humanity is actually a brahmachari. One who simply begets children like cats and dogs is not a proper father. The word brahmachari also refers to one who acts on the platform of Brahman, or devotional service. In the impersonal Brahman conception, there is no activity, yet when one performs activities in connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is to be known as a brahmachari. Thus, Pṛthu Mahārāja was an ideal brahmachari and grihastha simultaneously. Vishvaksena Nuvartishu refers to those devotees who are constantly engaged in the service of the Lord. Other devotees follow in their footsteps. Srila Narottam Das Thakur said, Echai Goshai Jar Mohitara Das. He is prepared to become the disciple of anyone who follows in the footsteps of the 6 Goswamis. Also, like all Vaishnavas, Maharaj Pṛthu was devoted to cow protection. He is devoted to cow protection, spiritual masters, and qualified Brahmins. Pṛthu Mahārāja was also very humble, meek, and gentle, and whenever he performed any philanthropic work or welfare activity for the general public, he would labor exactly as if he were tending to his own personal necessities. In other words, his philanthropic activities were not for the sake of show, but were performed out of personal feeling and commitment. All philanthropic activities should be thus performed. One second, what verse are we reading up to? We're reading up to... Okay, this is the last verse here. Kirturdva Gitaya Pumbish Triloke Tatra Tatraha Pravishta Karnarandreshu Strinam Rama Satam Iva. Throughout the whole universe, in the higher, lower, and middle planetary systems, Pṛthu Mahārāja's reputation was loudly declared, and all ladies and saintly persons heard his glories, which were as sweet as the glories of Lord Ramachandra. Purport. In this verse, the words Strinam and Rama are significant. It is the practice amongst ladies to hear and enjoy the praises of certain heroes. From this verse, it appears that Pṛthu Mahārāja's reputation was so great that ladies all over the universe would hear of it with great pleasure. At the same time, his glories were heard all over the universe by the devotees, and they were as pleasing as Lord Ramachandra's glories. Lord Ramachandra's kingdom is still existing, and recently there was a political party of India named the Rama Rajya Party, which wanted to establish a kingdom resembling the kingdom of Ram. Unfortunately, modern politicians want the kingdom of Ram without Ram himself. Although they have banished the idea of God consciousness, they still expect to establish the kingdom of Ram. Such a proposal is rejected by devotees. Pṛthu Mahārāja's reputation was heard by saintly persons because he exactly represented Lord Ramachandra, the ideal king. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 4th canto, 22nd chapter of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, entitled Pṛthu Mahārāja's Meeting with the 4 Kumaras. And tomorrow we'll read about Maharaj Pṛthu's going back home. And I think that will be the end of this narration of Pṛthu Mahārāja. Let's see. Yes, see at the end of the next chapter is the Phalashruti, the fruits one obtains from hearing all of this whole katha about Pṛthu Mahārāja. And then after that, the chapter after that, we'll begin chanting the song sung by Lord Shiva, the Rudra Geet. The Prachetas meet Lord Shiva, the Rudra Geet. How to chant the Rudra Geet and the Phalashruti. Alright. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Kantavika Giridhari, Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju Ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Shila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Shila Gurudeva Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Shila Bhakti Vedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Shila Bhakti Vedanta Sai Maharaj Shila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Shila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vishnupad Ashtatara Shatashmad Shila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Mahārāja Shila Gokshadas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Shila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai, Nitil Pravishto Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Shila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai, Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath Shar Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai, Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai, Namachay Shlahai Ras Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Kshetra Mandal Gaura Mandal Vraja Mandal Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai, Shri Radhakun Shamakun Ki Jai, Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai, Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai, Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai, Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai, Samagata Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Om, Vrindai Tulsi Devai, Priyai Keshavashacha Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Sattvatai Namo Namaha, Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat pranams. So we are more than halfway through now. Just a little bit more than halfway through. See? This is what we have left. We're on page, let's see. We're on page 240, and there are 420 pages left in the book. All right, Haribol. See you all tomorrow. Jai Shri Radhe. Dandavat pranams, Prajumna Prabhu, Madhavi Didi, Raseshwari Mataji, and Dira Mataji, and everybody else. Rup Manjari Didi, Haribol.